So reading from Srimad Bhagawatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 16, Text 6, Jai and Vijay cursed by the sages. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Yashamrita Mala. Yashaha. Shravana Vagaha. Yashamrita Mala Yasha Shravana Vagaha. Sadhyaha Punati Jagat Ashvapachad Vikuntaha Sadhya Punati Jagadashvapachad Vikuntaha Soham Bhavadvaya Upaladhya Sutrita Kirtish Soham Bhava Bhadya Upaladhva Srutirta Kirtish Chindyam Svabu Bahuam Api Vaha Pratikula Vitim Chindyam Swabuham Apiva Pratikula Vitam Yashamita Malayasha Shravana Vagraha Sadhya Pranati Jagadashva Pachad Vikuntaha Soham Bhavad Bhaya Upaladva Shrutitra Kirtish Chindyam Swabuhamapi Vapritukula Vitam Yashamita Mala Yasha Shravana Vagraha Sadhya Punakti Jagadashva Pachad Vikuntaha Soham Bhavad Vayupalad Shrutirtis Kirtish Chinjam Swabuham Apiva Pratikula Vritim Yashamita Tamala Yasha Shravanagaha Sadhya Punati Jagadavashapata Vikuntaha Soham Bhavad Vaya Upalabhaya Shritirta Kirtish Chindyam Swabuham Apiva Pratikula Vritim Others?
Yasya Vitamala Yasha Shravanavaga Sadhya Punati Jagadashva Pachad Vikuntaha Soham bhavadya upalabdha sutirtha kirti. Chinyam svabhaham apivapati kula vrittim. Yasya tamala yasha shravanavagaha. Sadya punati jagadashvapachadi kuntaha. Soham bhavadya upalabdha sutirtha kirti. Chinyam svabhaham apivapati kula vrittim. Yasya of whom Amrita nectar Amala uncontaminated Yasyaha glories Shravana hearing Avagaha entering into Sadyaha immediately Punati purifies Jagat the universe Asva Pachat including even the dog eaters Vaikuntaha without anxiety Saha that person Aham I am Bhavad Bayaha from you Upaladva obtained Sutirtha the best place of pilgrimage Kirtihi the fame Chindyam would cut off Svabhuvam my own arm Api even Baha towards you Patikula written acting inimically. In translation, anyone in the entire world, even down to the Chandala, who lives by cooking and eating the flesh of the dog, is immediately purified if he takes bath in hearing through the ear the glorification of my name, fame, etc. Now you have realized me without a doubt. Therefore, I will not hesitate to lop off my own arm if his conduct is found hostile to you. Please repeat. Anyone in the entire world, even down to the Chandala, who lives by cooking and eating the flesh of the dog, is immediately purified if he takes bath in hearing through the ear of glorification of my name, fame, etc. Now you have realized me without a doubt. Therefore I will not hesitate to lop off my own arm if its conduct is found hostile to you. A purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Real purification can take place in human society if its members take to Krishna consciousness. This is clearly stated in all Vedic literature. Anyone who takes to Krishna consciousness in all sincerity, and if he's not very advanced in good behavior, is purified. A devotee can be recruited from any section of human society, although it's not expected that everyone in all segments of society is well behaved. As stated in this verse, and in many places in Bhagavad Gita, even if one is not born in a Brahmana family, or even if he's born in a family of Chandals, if he simply takes to Krishna consciousness, he is immediately purified. In the Bhagavad Gita, 9th chapter, verses 30 through 32, it is clearly stated that even though a man is not well behaved, if he simply takes to Krishna consciousness, he is understood to be a saintly person. As long as a person is in this material world, he has two different relationships in his dealings with others. One relationship pertains to the body, and the other pertains to the spirit. As far as bodily affairs or social activities are concerned, although a person is purified on the spiritual platform, it is sometimes seen that he acts in terms of his bodily relationships. If a devotee is born in the family of a Chandal, the lowest caste, is sometimes found engaged in his habitual activities, he is not to be considered a Chandal. In other words, a Vaishnava should not be evaluated in terms of his body. The Shastra states that no one should think the deity in the temple to be made of wood or stone. And no one should think that a person coming from a lower caste family who has taken to Krishna consciousness is still of the same low caste. These attitudes are forbidden because anyone who takes to Krishna consciousness is understood to be fully purified. He is at least engaged in the process of purification, and if he sticks to the principles of Krishna consciousness, he will very soon be fully purified. The conclusion is that if one takes to Krishna consciousness with all seriousness, he is to be understood as already purified. And Krishna is ready to give him protection by all means. The Lord assures herein that he's ready to give protection to his devotee, even if there is a need to cut off part of his own body. Om Gyan Timirandasya Mochana Shilakaya Satsur Tamni Tasma Shigarvedama Sri Chaitanya Mano Vistam Chapatam Nibule Svarmukadam Mayam Dadanti Swapadantikam Vande Ham Shri Guru Shita Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sakatatam Sarvagnatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Savadvetam Savrutam Prisham Sitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padaha Saganulita Shri Vishakam Tamscha Hey Krishna Krishna Sunudyanam Jogapate Gopishak Gopikanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radha Vinamnishvari Vishvana Sundevi Arkanami Hari Pre Vancha Kalpachubhyascha Kripasindu Bhivcha Pita Nam Padmibhyo Vaishnava Namaha. Anyone in the entire world, even down to the Chandala, who lives by cooking and eating the flesh of the dog, is immediately purified if he takes bath in hearing with the ear of glorification of my name, fame, etc. Now you have realized me without a doubt. Therefore, I will not hesitate to lop off my own arm if his conduct is found hostile to you. So, you find here in this verse the mercy of Srila Prabhupada and the Vaishnavas. That the Prabhupada says that even if one is trying to take to Krishna consciousness, even though he may be engaged in the most degraded activity, he's on the path. So I think for me, this is a very good verse because I remember coming first to Krishna consciousness and I was hearing the story of Jagai Madai. So it's a very famous story everyone knows. That Jagai Madai where he actually came from a Brahmin background, but due to their bad association, they become very degraded. It's described that there wasn't one sin they didn't commit. So these Jagamati were always in a drunken state and harassing people and cursing people and always causing trouble. And as Lord Nityananda, as you saw by Lord Nityananda's parents yesterday, Lord Nityananda saw these two rascals, Jagai and Madai, and they inquired who they were. And the response was, oh, these are very degraded personalities that they've killed and maimed and raped, and they've done so many horrible things that you want to stay clear away from them. That these people are the most abominable people in this area. And Lord Nityananda's thinking was that these are the best candidates, right? That if we can imagine if that was us, right? If we were in the downtown, maybe in the downtown area, and we saw the most degraded person in a drunken stupor, would we want to go to them and say, please chant the names of Lord Hari? We might think twice about that. But the mercy of Lord Nityananda meaning eternal bliss, that he puts himself into very dangerous situations simply to deliver the fallen souls that don't want deliverance whatsoever. Because he can see past the conditioning, he can see the soul from within. So he thought, Lord Nityananda was thinking, that these are the best candidates for taking to this. So he went to them and begged them and said, please chant these names of Lord Hari. And they looked at Lord Nityananda and they thought he was crazy. He said, you're insane. Leave us be. Leave us alone. Take your God somewhere else. So similarly, we run into this attitude sometimes, right? And you bring up God, particularly nowadays, right? The very famous quote that people like to say is that I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Right? It's a very interesting term a lot of people use oftentimes. But oftentimes I think when people say that, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be spiritualist? What does it mean? What is the criteria for being spiritual? And oftentimes, I don't think people really have a grasp of what that really means. Does it just mean to say nice words that sound good and to engage in particular action we think is spiritual? That we can understand in any particular sphere of life or any kind of particular skill, one has to have particular knowledge and how to do that. And sometimes one has to get certifications, schooling, so many particular things. So similarly in the same way, that if someone says they're spiritual, what does that mean to be spiritual? What have you done? Are you less attached to the material nature? So this is the indication of someone that is spiritual. He's less attached to the material nature. He's more attached to the spiritual, which we understand through here is understanding that one is part and parcel of God, and that's the ultimate duty for that jivatma, that individual soul, is to please God. And we understand by pleasing God, we actually are pleasing everyone, because everyone's part and parcel of God. And ultimately, when we take to this Krishna consciousness, understand this philosophy, we understand our position. And this is the criteria for saying that one's spiritual. It's kind of like a popular thing for people to say, I'm spiritual, which a lot of times people don't know what that means. So we have to really know and understand the things that we say, and we're not just saying them out of habit, or oftentimes we come from a conditioning background. We engage in activities due to our prior conditioning. But anyway, we understand that this Lord Nityananda was the most merciful in trying to deliver this Jagai Madai. And so much so that, I think it was it Jagai or Madai that threw the pot at Lord Nityananda? Madai. It was Madai, yeah. So Madai took an earthen pot and he broke it over Lord Nityananda's head. And everyone was shocked. Couldn't believe that this had actually happened to such a great personality. And so word came around to Lord Chaitanya. They had heard what had happened. It's described that when a devotee is criticized, he could care less. Right? It doesn't really matter to him whether someone criticizes him or not. He doesn't take it very serious, right? But if another devotee is offended in a particular way, a devotee can actually act like fire, right? So, Lord Chaitanya comes to the spot, and he's about to destroy the two brothers. And he raises his hand, and he says, chakra, chakra, chakra. And he's about to just demolish both of them. And Lord Nityananda actually comes up to Lord Chaitanya and begs him, please, Lord, do not forget why you've come here. You've come here to deliver the most fallen. And these two are the most deserving of this. So please, let's give them our mercy. So because of the ultimate unfathomable love that Lord Nityananda had for these abominable personalities, Lord Chaitanya, his heart was melted. And even the two brothers, they could understand their wrongs and what they were doing. They came to this such degraded condition that they offended the greatest personality in the universe, Lord Nityananda. And then they decided to change their ways. And actually they became great saints. They actually went to every person that they ever offended and tried to pay full dandavats, which was a lot of people. And they built these like bathing ghats where people can take bath very nicely. So this is the proper mood of someone that has gained in sinful activity. And within this purport, we can understand that even though that they engage in very abominable activities, simply because they have changed their mentality and understand their position, that they became great saints. So the story is wonderful in the sense that it gives hope to anyone that might have been a sinner. And it's actually to give some knowledge to anyone that may be a saint. That no matter what degraded condition a person has fallen into, he can always make right if he tries to come to the Lord, and whatever that may be. And so we should always try to encourage devotees, at whatever level they're at, to come to Krishna consciousness, whether that means coming to a Sunday feast, or hearing the holy name, or chanting on their own, or distributing books, or something in that nature. Because every amount of step that we take to Krishna, Krishna takes more towards us. And so we ourselves have to be compassionate, but the first person we have to be compassionate is actually to ourselves, right? Sometimes we're our own worst critic or enemy. And so we should understand that that if we are trying to please the Lord, then all success is there, all perfection is there. That if we're simply thinking is, how can I do my service in the best possible way to please the Lord? Whether it's sweeping the floor, whether one's a GBC, does not matter. Whether one's a guru, then what matters is the conscience behind it. And so that's why this verse is so nice, because it's talking about that even if one comes from the most abominable position, if he's rightly situated in Krishna consciousness, then he shouldn't be criticized. And so we found this kind of happened in the early days for Srila Prabhupada in India, that the criticism that Prabhupada went up against from the Smarta Brahmins were saying that there's no way that the Westerners can become devotees. They're not even Sudras. They're less than Sudras. That how can you give Brahminical initiation to these people? And that the Smarta Brahmanas were so fixed on their arrogance that they couldn't understand what Prabhupada was doing. That Prabhupada was well aware and conscious that even in the early days that the people that he initiated, and many people that he would initiate, wouldn't necessarily strictly follow. But he knew that he had to establish Krishna consciousness to save the entire world. And he actually knew that if one just did a little bit of devotional service, then that was success in itself. That, I'm not sure if it was Bhakti Siddhanta or Srila Prabhupada said that something like, if one devotee is made, then all success is there. I forget the context of it, but the idea is that even if one devotee is made, then that's all success is there to his actual glorification of this movement. But as we can understand in Iskcon, there are thousands and thousands of devotees that are doing so much wonderful service and are engaged in service every day. And so we should understand this very rightly, that even though we may be engaged in Krishna consciousness, and we may be doing wonderful service, there's a tendency sometimes, when one is making some advancement, that the anartas, sometimes we don't realize the anartas within the heart are so deeply situated. Sometimes we don't realize how situated they are. So we always have to be on check of that. But sometimes we may be thinking in our hearts that I'm doing so much service. I'm so much better than this devotee because he doesn't come to Mongalartik, and I'm distributing so many books, and I'm doing so much in Krishna consciousness. And Krishna actually doesn't like this. That soon as one becomes proud, they say that the pride comes before the fall. When we become very proud of our service, or we become proud no matter what position we've been, we may be a spiritual master, we may become a guru or a great leader that's doing so much, but as soon as we become proud, Krishna is not favorable to that, and he takes everything away. So we have to constantly monitor ourselves of trying to be humble. We have to weed out the weeds within the heart. Just similarly, like when we're outside, if we don't maintain the grounds, and if we're trying to grow vegetables or flowers, there's so many weeds that come up. And even before you get the whole flower bed or the produce ready, you have to pick so many weeds out, and that's a very laborious process. But if it's not done, then nothing can grow. So similarly, we always have to be on top of seeing where we're at, analyzing and seeing, where am I at today? How am I feeling? Where is my consciousness at? Where is this? Why am I angry? If I'm angry, let me look deeply into that. Why am I angry? Is it something that I'm repressing? Is it something that I'm upset about? Is it something that someone did? And if so, let me work this out. And sometimes we always get this understanding what's going on within us, but sometimes we choose to ignore that, right? Because we don't want to sometimes look at it. Sometimes looking very deeply within oneself, with one's insecurities or weaknesses, can be a very challenging thing that many people don't want to do, right? Well, it's essential that we look at these things and that we either try to accept them or we try to change them. Because the weeds and will prevent us from the Bhakti Bij developing within the heart. So we have to constantly uproot these weeds at every moment. And this is through actually understanding what it means to be humble. Humble means to be honest or sincere where one's at. And one should act accordingly. But despite whatever condition we may be in, as Prabhupada states here, is that the Bhagavad 9th chapter 33 is clearly stated that even though a man is not well behaved, if he simply takes to Krishna consciousness, he is understood to be a saintly person. As long as a person is in the material world, he has two different relationships. So I'm going to take this a little further into that verse. It's a very nice verse. Such activities are performed in his constant position, and they are technically called devotional service. Now, in the conditioned state, sometimes devotional service and the conditional service, the relation to the body will parallel with one another. But then again, sometimes these activities come opposed to one another. As far as possible, a devotee is very cautious so he does not do anything that would disrupt his wholesome condition. He knows that perfection in his activities depends on his progressive realization of Krishna consciousness. Sometimes, however, it may seem that a person in Krishna consciousness commits some act which may be taken as most abominable, socially or politically. But such a temporary fall down does not disqualify him. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is stated that if a person falls down but is wholeheartedly engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord being situated within his heart, beautifies him and excuses him from that abomination. The material contamination is so strong that even a yogi fully engaged in service of the Lord sometimes becomes ensnared. But Krishna consciousness is so strong that such an occasional fall down is at once rectified. Therefore, the process of devotional service is always success. No one should deride a devotee for some accidental fall down from the path, from the ideal path. For, as is explained in the next verse, such occasional fall downs will be stopped in due course as soon as the devotee is completely situated in Krishna consciousness. So here we can see that Krishna is so merciful to anyone that even if he's engaged in Krishna consciousness and accidentally has a fall down, that if he's righteously situated, meaning if he's engaged in his position of understanding that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he continues in his service and corrects his mistakes, then it is all possible for his success. And we hear there's many stories in Bhagawatam of yogis reaching great levels and due to certain attachment come down and have to back to the material world and have to engage in different activities. But if one is sincere, this is the key point here, is if one is sincere, even though he makes a mistake in the process of devotional service, if as long as he stays so, all perfection is there. And it's compared to, say, someone that's in a shower, right? If someone's in a shower, you don't, and he comes out and he's not completely clean, you don't say, well, you're not completely clean, what's wrong with you? No, the person's in the shower, he's in the process of cleansing himself. It may take some time, but he's in the process. So similarly, that someone may take to Krishna consciousness and he may have some bad habits that it's hard for him to give up. But if he continues the process, he's righteously situated. He's continually striving to make constant devotional service. And really, in one sense, that's kind of the success. If one just remains steady in Krishna consciousness, of coming to temple on a regular basis. Someone may be living outside and have a profession or a career or a family or this or that. But if they're continually progressing in Krishna consciousness, trying to gauge everything they do in Krishna consciousness, they can make steadily progress. So even if it just remains in Krishna consciousness for some time, and maybe hasn't come to the pure stage of hasn't come to the advanced stage of going back home back to Godhead, still he will make great advancements to where in his next life he'll be put in a favorable condition. So there's no loss or diminution in Krishna consciousness. That even the smallest amount of devotional service can save one from the most abominable regions of hell. And when we speak of hell, sometimes we have this idea, right, of this fiery place where a person has a pitchfork and he's ready to stab you as you get down there. But as we can understand, hell can be right here in the material world. Just turn on the news and you can see hellish conditions every day. There's so many people suffering in this world in so many ways, in numerous types of ways. And that's a very hellish condition. So for someone that's on the spiritual path, he sees that this place is not a place of enjoyment. It's not a place of satisfaction. That there's, at every turn, there are difficulties. There are struggles. To live in this world is to experience difficulty. And then sometimes we have certain occasions to mark significant entries in people's life, like marriages or births or things of that nature. Acquiring a new house or having an advancement in one's career. And there are some pleasures to those things, otherwise people wouldn't want to engage in those things. But one should also understand that there's suffering that comes along with it, right? That even if one takes to Grihastha ashram, that there's great pleasure in it, but there's actually great suffering in it as well. And one should understand that any position that he gets into, that there will be some enjoyment, of course, but there will also be some suffering. Sometimes when a child is born, it's a great pleasure for the family members, and everyone's very happy, and it's wonderful to see children. They're wonderful to be around. But that very same child will cause suffering for another person, whether if that child passes away or gets sick or whatever it may be. That would be the same source of pleasure, will be the same source of anxiety that comes from that. And we should see this in the material world to a degree that we try to enjoy this material world. We should also understand to that degree we're trying to enjoy it outside of Krishna. To that degree, we will also suffer. So it's kind of like a cost analysis, right? If we see something in particular and we think, wow, I could really enjoy this. This would be really nice. We should also be thinking, okay, it might be very pleasurable, but how much am I going to suffer from this too? You know, it's any time that someone that is good with money, he understands how money works. And he sees how he can make the most out of getting more money from more money, or you can see about how he invests money and how he loses it. And so similarly to say, we should see that everything has a price, right? Everything that we try to enjoy in this material world has a price. So we can say that, okay, I'm enjoying now, but I'm going to have to suffer later for this. And we can see this is a very common thing. So herein, we can actually perfect our lives if we engage in the purification process of hearing, chanting, remembering, and continually reading Srila Prabhupada's books. You can make great advancement. And these Srimad Bhagavatam is actually a manual. You know, like there's many manuals. How do you, like if you get like a bicycle or something or some kind of toy, you have to kind of go through this manual and kind of figure out how it works. And then you can put something together. So similarly, in the same way, Srimad Bhagavatam, if we actually follow this, like we've heard, we can make great advancement in this life and going back to Godhead. We won't have to experience this birth, death, old age, disease. And with this birth, death, old age, disease, that it doesn't really discriminate who you are, whether you're rich, poor, European, American, whoever it may be, that these activities everyone has to experience, right? Whether you are Bill Gates or whether you're a poor person on the street, everyone has to experience birth, everyone has to experience old age, disease, and they're not very pleasurable things. And so a person that understands or realizes that he doesn't want to experience these things, he tries to change his position for a better position. And this is what Srimad Bhagavatam is giving us. It's giving us the instructional guide to perfect our lives in this life and then in the next. Are there any questions or comments? Maharaj.
I have a couple of things. I liked the point you made about how we judge others for their conduct if they're somehow they don't come up to the standard that I imagine I have.
Yeah.
There's a story that Prabhupada told, I guess, early on, and I'm not sure how many details I'll be able to recall because I heard the story over 50 years ago. But there's a story that Prabhupada told about a Brahmana who lived next door to a society lady, prostitute, and he was this very pious, righteous Brahmin, very proud of his virtue, and he was quite disturbed by her good business. So every time a man would visit her, he would take a rock and put it on this pile, and it was like keeping track of all her nastiness. And when the time of death came, he had to take some kind of awful birth, and she went back to Godhead. Because, as it was said to him, you're meditating on her apparent sinful behavior. She's meditating on how fallen she is and how far she is from God. And she's in the circumstance where she has to do that for a living. But she's still a pious soul. And so that's her meditation is, how am I ever going to reach God because I'm engaged in this awful activity. And then the other thing was about those verses from the 9th chapter. Sometimes you hear devotees discuss text 30 especially as if it were some sort of excuse for poor behavior or even worse, that other people might use it as an excuse for their poor behavior. And that's not what those verses are about. If you look at them in the context of that chapter, the most confidential knowledge, he's building up to the most secret of process, then be made righteous, as Krishna points out in the 31st chapter. So what Krishna is saying is that if someone's goal in life is him alone, they're not interested in liberation or sense gratification, that's not the goal of their life, but they have these bad habits, they have these samskaras from previous lives, then if they just keep pursuing that goal, they'll very quickly be made righteous by bhakti, by the practice of bhakti. She's more powerful than our sinful desires. She's more powerful than the results of our sinful activities. So he says in verse 31 that they very quickly become righteous and come to me. And I think it's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur who points out that one way to understand that is if someone has a high fever today, but they're taking their medicine, the fever's going to go down tomorrow and it'll be gone the day after tomorrow. So the important thing is that they're taking their medicine. So what Krishna's really doing there is he's glorifying bhakti, and he builds up to, okay, here it comes the most secret of all secrets, just manmanapa because love me. And that makes everything right.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Yeah, I made it more clear and understand. Thank you. Yeah, this is a very purifying process. That bhakti is so special, unique, that despite any condition that one's in, one can reach perfection. Anything else?
So going back to Godhead, can we go if we are not ready yet? Let's say we still have some attachments to the material world, or some attachments to simple activities, but we are a devotee, let's say we leave our body and things break down. Can we go straight to the spiritual world, or we gotta take 1 year to purify these things?
Well, as we can understand, there are many verses in the Vedas that talk about this. But ultimately, Krishna's independence, and every situation is individual. So it depends really on the kind of situation it is. And it's guaranteed, right, if one goes to Vrindavan, that he can go back home, back to Godhead. But that sounds very simple, but it's not always so simple. I know in particular of a person that he was an amazing personality as far as distributing books, right? And it kind of relates to this verse too. And he could just we could go on Sankirtan, he would wear a very, first class suit, and he was just he could reach anybody. He would go to everybody and anybody, and he could just he could call somebody, it would come to him. He'd go like this, and he'd come right to him. He was just memorizing, But back at the temple, he had some material issues, right? And he wasn't necessarily, couldn't live in the ashram anymore. But even though it was kind of interesting, he was kind of engaged in some sinful activity, he was just